I'm on the west coast of Scotland, 20 miles north of Ullapool in the district of Assynt. This is a stunningly beautiful place of sandy beaches like this one, rocky green hills and small croft cottages studding the landscape.
I'm Roddy Kerr, crofter in Clashnessy. I've been for 15 years, 16 years.
Crofting is a kind of small farming unique to Scotland. It's embedded in life here in Clashnessy, where Roddy Kerr is a leading member of the community. The attractions of life in places like this are clear.
Just look at the place, why you want to stay here, you know. I just count my blessings every time I get up in the morning.
This year marks the 140th anniversary of the first laws giving crofters security of tenure. And today, crofting households make up almost a third of the population across the Highlands and Islands. But the average size of a croft is just 12 acres. Crofting's hard physical work, and yet a croft plot is rarely enough to make a living from, even with access to communal hill grazing.
I remember my father saying when he was growing up, he says, I was never hungry, we always had plenty of food, but he never had any money in his pocket. When he went to school, he went in bare feet.
So where did this peculiar form of agriculture come from? Why has it taken root here? And does it have a future? Crofting's origins are in one of the darkest periods of Scottish history.
I'm standing at the top of our croft, the crofting village of Arnall, on the west coast of Lewis. And it's a windy day.
48 miles west of here, Elizabeth Ritchie helps run a croft.
We're not full-time crofters. We do it as a part-time occupation. There's busy times of the year, lambing time, and other the quiet times.
When she's not crofting, Elizabeth is a senior history lecturer at the University of the Highlands and Islands, and she's an expert on the history of crofting.
People tend to think of crofting as a very traditional form of agriculture, one that's perhaps been present for hundreds, even thousands of years, which is not actually the case. Crofting is an artefact of modernism. It is something which was created 200 years ago.
Towards the end of the 18th century, the tenants of small farms in the hills and glens of the Highlands and Islands began to be cleared out towards the coast. Their landlords had seen an opportunity.
If you're an estate owner, you can get money in through wool and mutton. And so starting to run sheep, especially the new improvement types of sheep, which were bigger and furrier, could be very profitable indeed. But sheep need a lot of land. They need the inland mountainous areas for grazing in the summer, but they also need the more fertile, productive areas in the winter. So it wasn't compatible to have people living in the old style, using the mountains for their shearings and their cattle and growing their own crops. So landlords tended to clear people out of these fertile valleys and replace them maybe with one or two shepherds.
Back at Clashnessy on the mainland, Roddy Kerr is well aware of the history. This area is now known as the North Lochimber Estate and was owned by the Marquess of Stafford, later the Duke of Sutherland, and his family. They're notorious as some of the harshest of clearance landlords.
The factors pushed everybody to the edge of their land, which was, as you can see, is no use for anything, not cultivating. It was only good for grazing the odd sheep. They managed to make a living out of it from the sea and from just wee bits of land that were there, get crops off them.
We certainly have records of particularly brutal clearances where people's homes were burned above their heads and people had nowhere to go that night and so on. Clearance is also a more subtle thing. You can clear people by not renewing their tenancies, and you could do that over time and gradually get rid of people, and that was done a lot as well. That is far less brutal, far less dramatic.
But you kind of erode communities like that.
Yes. The landlords usually didn't want to get rid of them completely. They saw the people as a resource for a while.
People were moved into communities made up of small farm plots or crofts, and they were deliberately designed to be too small for a family to make a living.
The idea was that you would work at some waged employment and you would have this bit of land. The reason for that was this sort of Enlightenment mentality and this push towards commercialism. This is all happening at the same time as the Industrial Revolution is beginning. There are people who chose not to go elsewhere, who chose not to move to the cities, who chose not to emigrate. Others had to stay on crofts. For some of those people, crofting was a negative thing. It could be pretty brutal. But for others, it was also a way to stay in the place where you belonged.
But even on their new, undersized plots, tenants could still be badly treated.
The landlord could push anybody off out of their house that they'd built, could push them off the land and expel them from the land completely, so that they would have to emigrate or migrate somewhere else.
To Glasgow?
Or wherever, yeah. It was quite hard going,
Eventually, the resentment of crofters began to make itself felt.
By the 1880s, you have quite a lot of rioting by crofters, particularly around the removal of bits of land and so on.
One group of crofters here in Assynt resisted the estate manager.
There was good grazing ground there. The factor decided he wanted it all for himself and take it off the crofters. And the crofters actually rebelled against them. They sent the constabulary up from Glasgow, because there was none up here. It was a namesake of ours, a Hugh Kerr. Got everybody together and chased the constabulary back from whence they came, Sent them back with their tail between their legs,
So there was quite a bit of spirit in the crofters?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
There's a real political movement gets going. In fact, there's a whole political party, the Crofters Party, which gets established. There's calls for a government commission, the Napier Commission, and they travel all around the Highlands and Islands talking to crofters about what the problems are and what needs to be done to solve it. And as a result, you have legislation in 1886 which provides a lot more protections for crofters, so that they're no longer under the absolute power, really, of the landlord or his or her factor.
That legislation laid the foundation for crofting to become part of the fabric of Highland life. Donna Smith is the Chief Executive of the Scottish Crofting Federation.
Now what you see when you drive around the Highlands and Islands is a lot of these little villages or little townships and things that you see. Those are crofting townships. So it's the crofting that then kept those populations there. And that's a large element of what we still want crofting to do. It's about keeping people in those areas, and that allows a whole little miniature economy in that area to still continue on. Crofters are your teacher in the school, they're the shopkeeper. They're not just crofters, they are the community there. And in a lot of places in the Highlands, if crofting legislation hadn't been put in, the people would have continued to be forced out and we would have even more empty space.
In recent decades, crofting has continued to evolve.
People can do many things with their crofts, and woodland like this is certainly one of the options. I was on a woodland croft a couple of weeks ago, and they're doing all sorts of really interesting stuff involving the community, as well as producing stuff using the wood on their croft.
Crofters today are sometimes not what we might expect.
We inherited the croft, so we just decided to sell up and build a wooden house and move up and carry on.
Gathering sheep by quad bike is John Crowther, who's one of Roddy Kerr's neighbours.
It's about our 9th year, I think.
And you moved up from Stafford?
From Stafford, yeah. A local mechanic, got a rental property that we rent that out as well, so a bit of everything. My wife works for a charity in the village in Lochimber. I'm from a big farming family and I've always just loved being out farming and doing. They're Cooney pigs. We bought them for the freezer, but we opened a rental cabin and they're really tame. Give them a fuss and they'll roll on the back. So they're just really tame, so we just tend to keep them now for the guests to enjoy.
They've escaped becoming sausages?
They have at the moment, yeah. And of course the wife gave them names, so...
What are they called?
Tilly and Kevin. Kevin was for Kevin Bacon, because he was going to the shop, so... that was it, really. There's 2 ponies somewhere, a miniature Shetland and stuff, I think they're down the bottom. Again, more pets, too many pets.
But that's the pleasure of living
that's
here.
That's the pleasure, exactly, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's the lifestyle. We just love that. Winter times the weather can get demanding, shall we say, but it's okay, get used to it. I just love being outside and being in the fresh air and away from the madness of the cities.
And here in Clashnessie there has been momentous change. Despite the 1886 laws and plenty of legislation since, including a right to buy, many crofters still pay rent to landowners, and those landowners can be difficult to deal with. That's why, in 1992, the Assynt Crofters Trust, which today is chaired by Roddy Kerr, launched an audacious bid to overturn the history of tenancy. This estate on which the crofters live had been bought and sold again, and then ended in the hands of liquidators with an uncertain future. The Crofters decided they'd buy the estate for themselves.
There was 3 or 4 people, 3 in particular. Alan McRae was one, John Mackenzie and Bill Ritchie were instrumental in getting the mechanics of the buyout done and going to the right people to raise money, and along with others in the area who were really quite strong in supporting their efforts as well, you know.
I met Alan McRae. And
he was
he was a lovely man, but he was quite. There was no arguing with him. He was quite fierce.
Yeah, once he made his mind up, that was it. Yeah. You know, nothing else mattered. Yeah, well, there's quite a lot of people like that in this area, you know. Yeah.
They raised £300,000 in donations and grants and drove the hardest of bargains. And on February the 1st, 1993, they bought the 21,000-acre estate. The model they pioneered has since been followed by other crofting estates, including Barvas, where Elizabeth Ritchie lives. So how does she feel crofting has changed?
Crofting nowadays is perceived quite positively as a pleasant lifestyle choice, being able to be in the outdoors, being able to do physical work. When so many of us are stuck behind desks and looking at screens all day, there's a definite appeal. There's a lot of people coming into crofting who've maybe chosen that sort of thing. But for others, it's a continuation of being in a place, working in a place, being part of a community, for all the good and bad that comes along with that.
This programme was produced and presented by me, Richard Baynes.